the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network presents Vatican Insider with Joan Lewis. Each week, Joan brings you news from inside the Vatican and the Church around the world, as well as interviews and answers to your questions. Now, here's the host of Vatican Insider, Joan Lewis.
Welcome to Vatican Insider this first weekend of December 2025, a month that is filled to the brim with appointments for Pope Leo XIV, including a special Jubilee audience on Saturday, December the 6th. He'll recite the Angelus on Sunday the 7th, and will also say the Marian prayer on Monday, December 8th, Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a holiday in both the Vatican and Italy. Later Monday afternoon, the Holy Father will go to Piazza di Spagna to pay homage to the statue of Mary Immaculate atop a giant pillar in the square. Now, my guest this week in the interview segment is Patrick Reilly, a friend of many years and founder in 1993 of the Newman Society. We spoke when he was in Rome for the November 1st declaration by Pope Leo of Cardinal John Henry Newman as Doctor of the Church. Patrick explains that the mission of the Cardinal Newman Society is to promote and defend faithful Catholic education. A fascinating discussion, so stay tuned for that after the news. And now, a brief overview of the papal trip to Turkey and Lebanon that began November 27th and ended December 2nd with Pope Leo's return to Rome and an overnight stay at Castel Gandolfo. Leo XIV said he wanted to be a messenger of unity and peace in both countries, and those words were heard often through his speeches. First in Turkey, a land whose history encompasses ancient Anatolian civilizations, the rise and fall of Ottoman empires, and finally its establishment as a secular republic in 1923. Turkey, where Christian leaders, convened by Emperor Constantine, met in Nicaea in 325 AD in the first ever ecumenical council, whose purpose was to achieve Christian unity by resolving the Arian controversy and establishing orthodoxy on the nature of Jesus Christ. That meeting 1700 years ago gave us the Nicene Creed. The principal reason for Pope Leo's apostolic trip to Turkey was to commemorate the 1700th anniversary of that first ecumenical council. On November 28th in Iznik, formerly Nicaea, Pope Leo was joined by 27 Christian leaders who together prayed the Nicene Creed. Amazingly, 4 of the 5 patriarchs of the ancient patriarchal sees, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, were present. Christians were largely united during their first millennium, but began dividing into different denominations with the East-West Schism of 1054, when the Orthodox and Catholic communities split from one another. Among the highlights of Pope Leo's time in Turkey was his visit to the celebrated Blue Mosque, where he observed the Muslim custom of removing his shoes before entering. He visited in silence and in a spirit of recollection and attentive listening. He had meetings with Bartholomew I and other Orthodox religious leaders, celebrated Mass Saturday, visited a home for the elderly run by the Little Sisters of the Poor, and met with priests, bishops, and men and women religious on Sunday. Sunday, the patronal feast of St. Andrew Apostle, Leo attended Divine Liturgy at the Patriarchal Church of St. George in Istanbul and later had lunch with Patriarch Bartholomew I. Sunday, November 30th, Leo arrived in Lebanon as a messenger of peace and unity. Lebanon, a land that has experienced periods of political instability, including a civil war from 1975 to 1990, foreign occupations, and recent economic hardship in the aftermath of the 2020 Beirut port explosion. Pope Leo arrived in the land of Cedar Sunday in a pouring rain, but was welcomed with great warmth, enthusiasm, and joy by the people of Beirut, the president of Lebanon, and civil and religious officials. After meeting civil authorities, Pope Leo XIV made a 30-minute visit to the Carmelite Sisters of the Theotokos in Harissa. Monday, December 1st. Despite the rain, crowds with flags and umbrellas welcomed Pope Leo at the monastery of St. Maron in Anyaya, the resting place of St. Charbel Makhlouf, the first pope to visit the tomb of this Lebanese Maronite hermit known for numerous miraculous healings attributed to his intercession. Leo then met with bishops, priests, consecrated men and women, and pastoral workers at the shrine of Our Lady of Lebanon in Harissa, highlighting coexistence, education, and support for migrants as concrete paths towards peace. Also Monday, at an ecumenical and interreligious encounter in Martyr Square in Beirut, Pope Leo XIV upheld the Catholic Church's desire to foster dialogue inspired by divine love, so as to affirm the dignity of every human being. In early evening, Pope Leo met with young people in Bukerque, Lebanon. The event began with the testimonies of volunteers and young people before two youth asked the Pope some questions. He began by addressing those present with the greeting of the risen Christ, Assalamu alaikum, or peace be with you. He urged them not to give in to despair, rather to cultivate friendships rooted in genuine love and to keep the enthusiasm that is needed to change the course of history. On Tuesday, December 2nd, the last day of his apostolic journey, Pope Leo XIV visited the Le Croix Hospital in Jal el-Dib, one of the largest mental disability hospitals in the Middle East. He praised the work of the religious sisters and staff who dedicate themselves to caring for the most fragile. Leo then celebrated Mass at the Beirut waterfront for 150,000 Lebanese faithful who have accompanied his long-awaited visit to their country. He urged Lebanese to disarm their hearts so as to build a newly reunited Lebanon where peace and justice reign, and he encouraged them to nurture the dream that God has placed in their hands, praying that they may carry their sufferings and perseverance in hope. Lebanon, arise, he concluded, be a home of justice and fraternity. After Mass, Leo XIV prayed silently at the site of the 2020 explosion in the port of Beirut that killed over 200 people, wounded 7,000, and left 300,000 without homes, a tragedy that deepened the political and economic crises already burdening the population. He stood before the monument bearing the names of all the victims as the world looked on. He then bent to touch a wreath of red roses placed at its base, lit a candle, and raised his hands in prayer. He also greeted some of the families of victims and survivors from the blast, holding photos of their loved ones. Later, Pope Leo, on the flight back to Rome, held a press conference with the 81 journalists aboard. He spent Tuesday night and all day Wednesday at Castel Gandolfo. Those are the highlights, but stay here for my interview with Patrick Reilly of the Cardinal Newman Society.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2004. EWTN announces the launch of the newest addition to its lineup, Sunday Night Live with Father Benedict Groeschel, featuring Father Groeschel doing a little teaching, a little preaching, and taking phone calls.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with the gospel message. EWTN radio services transmit 24/7 on over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio affiliates, satellite radio, and web streaming. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
Welcome back to Vatican Insider. Here's Joan Lewis.
Well, I want to welcome my listeners to a wonderful new exciting guest in the interview segment of Vatican Insider. My guest today is actually a friend of many years, Patrick Reilly. And if you've heard his name, it could be because he's the founder, president, and CEO of the Newman Society. So, Patrick, welcome to Rome. Welcome back.
Thank you, Joan. It's great to be here. Always great to be in Rome.
And especially the weather. Here we are, All Saints Day, and I mean, who would have guessed that it was in the 70s or high 70s or something today?
Great.
Beautiful. But you've had an amazing 3 days. This week has been dedicated to the Jubilee of Education. On the 30th, you went to Castel Gandolfo. You can tell us about that in a minute. On October 31st, the meeting, of course, with the Pope. And then today, as we speak, All Saints' Day and the proclamation of Newman as Doctor of the Church. So kind of summarize those days, your feelings, and what everything's meant to you.
It's been so exciting. John Henry Newman has always been for us, such a great visionary of Catholic education. But when I started the Cardinal Newman Society in 1993, he was, the great Cardinal John Henry Newman, and then he was beatified, canonized, now named Patron of Catholic Education with Thomas Aquinas, and now Doctor of the Church. So it's been very, very extraordinary, and I just couldn't miss the opportunity to be here in Rome for this. Yeah. So, yes.
Well, and when you mentioned, Doctors of the Church, there's 38. He's the 38th. Right. There are 4 women, so 34 men and 4 women. But I mean, if you look out at the legion of saints that there are, because that is one of the requirements to be a person of great saintliness, to be named a Doctor of the Church, obviously the writings and the teachings and everything else of that person. But there's just so much that can be said. So it's a very small world, the world of doctors of the Church. And you told me something interesting. When I mentioned that it was Pope Leo XIII who made Newman a cardinal, and what else did Leo do?
He also named St. Thomas Aquinas Patron of Catholic Education. So
here we are,
a great tie-in.
A successor named Leo XIV, who names Newman Doctor of the Church and co-patron.
That's right.
Along with Aquinas.
That's right.
So that is co-patron of the Catholic Education Mission. So that is so exciting. Well, Matt, tell us briefly about the Castel Gandolfo visit.
That was wonderful. So one of the institutions that we recommend in the Newman Guide, which is our publication that recommends higher education, elementary and secondary education, now also that is strongly, faithfully Catholic, and that really provides a great model for what Newman's vision was all about. One of those institutions, a very new institution, is the Catholic Institute of Technology, which is based there in Castel Gandolfo.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, and they do a lot of great work there. They collaborate with the observatory on some things, and it's just a wonderful institution. And so I went out there to give a lecture on Newman and the great celebration of him being named Doctor of the Church. And we had students from Catholic Tech as well as from the University of Dallas.
That's a great school.
Here. It is.
They probably have the most amazing campus of
they do.
Any university, Catholic or not, in Rome. Huge property. I think they even have their own vineyard.
Yeah. They're well known for their Rome program. And it's again one of the institutions that we recommend in the Newman Guide.
Oh, and how can you not? It's a wonderful university. Yeah. Say it again, Catholic
Institute of Technology, or Catholic Tech.
Okay.
Yes.
I did not have to explore that myself.
Yes. It's a great.
So you had that wonderful visit in Castel Gandolfo itself. Almost all of us, when we hear the name, the first thing we think of is the Apostolic Palace, and which is not where Pope Leo is staying. He's staying on a property adjacent to the town, but it's still part of what's called the papal properties. Villa Barberini is the name of it. And actually, that's where you can take tours and see the immensely beautiful gardens. And then also, there's been a farm for years. Okay. And they have, 25, 30 cows. They own their own milk, yogurt, olive oil, and a whole bunch of things that they make that are sold in the Vatican supermarket. A fascinating place. So when we say Castel Gandolfo, it is a lot more than just the papal palace. That's part of the
It is.
Part
it was
of the
my
area.
first. Yes, it was my first time there. It's truly beautiful. I recommend it to anyone who
lake
comes to Rome.
And everything.
It's not far away.
Yeah, exactly. So then that was the 30th, and then yesterday you met the Pope or saw the Pope.
Saw the Pope. Yeah. Yes. No personal greeting, but we were delighted to be at the papal audience for the Jubilee for Catholic educators.
Sure.
And he gave a wonderful talk about Catholic education and the importance of it. And it was just a very exciting time to be there with all of these educators from around the world. And on top of that would have been enough, but on top of that, there was just this buzz of excitement about what was happening today.
Today, All Saints Day, we would have a new doctor of the church. So
We would, yes.
his name means a lot to you and to Newman centers on university campuses. Now the man's a doctor of the church. Makes us sit up a little straighter, I think, when we say his name. And then, of course, today, the Mass, the proclamation, that was so beautiful. And the square, it had to be.
It was. It was. And it really is, I believe very strongly. So of the 38 doctors, only 3 were born in the modern age.
Yeah.
And he in particular speaks to the problems that we're dealing with in the modern times in terms of secularism, relativism, and in particular education. That was his entire life, was dedicated in different ways to educating the laity, and he really believed that the laity need to be well-formed intellectually, spiritually, as a whole person, and in doing so, that was the answer to the problems that the church is facing today. And so
I do want to go into that aspect a little more in a minute, but I want to look back at why you founded the Newman Society, obviously, and what its goal is. And then I realized, for example, we'll talk about the guide. So tell us again why you felt the need.
Yeah, so
what was the need?
I started the Cardinal Newman Society just 2 years out of college, so I was very young, and had met a number of others who had attended Catholic colleges and universities in the United States, and we had all experienced great disappointment in these institutions. They were not living up to their Catholic identity in a positive way, but even in a negative way, there were many scandals. They were promoting things that were clearly contrary to the Catholic Church. We still see that.
So you already had a good knowledge of your faith going in then.
Yes.
To be able to realize that.
I did, but I don't think it. Yeah, it was. I think it was pretty obvious to anyone that this was clearly not in keeping with Catholic teaching.
The word Catholic.
Pretty obvious things. So I started the Cardinal Newman Society. Initially, it was sort of raising these concerns, trying to document what was going on in these institutions in order to convince the bishops, lay Catholics, anyone who could have an influence on these institutions. But it was with the Newman Guide that things really, I think, took off for the Cardinal Newman Society. So we didn't start with that, but in 2007 we launched the Newman Guide, and that's the very same year that Pope Benedict began talking repeatedly about what he called the educational emergency, this crisis that we're seeing across, particularly in the West, of young people just losing hope and not really knowing Christ and not knowing their faith and not having answers to the questions that are really important to the human soul.
And even before Benedict, you had Ex Corde Ecclesiae,
that's right.
At the heart of the church, or from the heart of the church, John Paul's document on the teaching of the church.
Yes, that's what's inspired me initially to start the Cardinal Newman Society. So that was 1990 that Ex Corde Ecclesiae was issued, and I was editor of my campus newspaper and dealing with lots of issues at this large Jesuit university that was not in keeping with its Catholic identity. And here comes Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II, declaring things about Catholic education that I had in a much more limited way been arguing in my articles on the campus newspaper, and just realizing, okay, the church is with us, and God is with this, and we need to not back down. We need to stand up and be firm and say that we as lay Catholics insist upon Catholic education providing the formation that Catholic education is supposed to provide. It's been great. With the Newman Guide, we've been able to identify and recognize. Initially, for many years, it was only colleges and universities.
Right, exactly.
And
so it's fairly recent that you updated it in 2023.
Yeah.
You expanded it to include, you're now reaching 75,000 families, and you've now included Catholic elementary, secondary, and graduate school options.
That's correct.
So that's a huge, big category to explore.
Yes, and then this year we'll actually be adding recognition of homeschool and hybrid programs, as well as online programs, anything that educates the faithful in a way that's consistent with Catholic teaching. And so
what kind of a staff do you have, Patrick? I don't think I've ever asked.
I have 15 right now.
Okay.
15 part-time and full-time employees. And we all work very hard. It's a big mission, and we're constantly...
Well, you've got to do a lot of traveling to go to these places, and
Yeah.
you mention in the guide that, you vet. Newman Guide has earned a trusted reputation for vigorously vetting Catholic colleges, ensuring they have strong policies and standards that uphold Catholic identity from academics, and athletics to faculty hiring and campus life. How do you vet a college?
We have to look at everything top to bottom. Obviously, we can't always head off every problem that will come in, but we operate on the principle that just as we as individual Catholics, we strive to live our faith, but when you let any aspect of your life fall away and not be guided by Christ, you start to have problems, right? And so we're always trying to we're looking at institutions that are willing to firmly institute their Catholic identity into all of their policies, into their hiring. We're looking for places that are hiring faculty, hiring leaders who are truly faithful to the church and are eager to present that to young people. And we look at, as you said, at the athletics, at the student life programs, the campus life, the dorm situation is very, very important in the colleges. The activities in high schools and grade schools.
Well, the dorm
are very
situation
important.
in the sense that you might have a smaller college or even a big university where they have, guys and gals in the same
That's
dorm.
right.
Whereas, of course, it would be much more beneficial, wiser, whatever word you want to use, to have dorm A for gals, dorm B for guys. What if you just don't have that kind of property yet? You've got buildings that are for the staff and classrooms and everything else, but most of your students might even come from the area, from nearby,
Right.
and only 25% are boarding, but you don't really quite have enough money to build bigger dorms.
Well, it's the schools that we work with, all of them make certain that men and women have separate residences. In some cases, they'll have one large building and they actually have closed off sections where it's men and women.
Okay.
But they're very careful about that, and they're very the entire culture is a culture of chastity. They promote an understanding that and an expectation that young people will live a properly chaste life, and it creates an atmosphere of great joy. I mean, today, pretty much every institution, including most Catholic colleges and universities, have done away with that and have said, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to institute anything, we're going to just allow young people to do what they think is best. And it creates all kinds of anxieties and problems on the campuses. I mean, can you imagine the typical student walking into the classroom at 8:30 in the morning and having lived the kind of lifestyle that typical students live, and having the anxieties of the kind of relationships that they're in? They're not prepared to learn. And so even just purely from an academic standpoint, it's a very, very bad idea. So we just see great joy on these campuses where these young people are just having real friendships and engaging with each other.
They know the
in a proper
limits
way.
and kind of breathe a sigh of relief that there are limits.
They do.
That there are barriers.
They do.
It's like you're always, not that you're ever going to tell your parents this when you're little, but when they set rules and regulations and you're 12 years, and you can't be out till midnight, at least you can blame it on your parents when you're friends.
Right.
But you know what? Inside they're happy. They're very happy that their mom and dad have made the rules, And so, now what other type of thing would be unacceptable? I mean, hiring a theologian who doesn't have the correct background, or what?
Right. So there's the mandatum where
that's what I was gonna ask
theologians
you
are
about,
required to have to.
That came out of Ex Corde Ecclesiae, if I'm...
It did. It actually comes out of the 1983 Code of Canon Law, but it was not really implemented
in a papal
Ex Corde
document.
Ecclesiae strengthened it. And in most Catholic colleges and universities in the United States, it's still not paid attention to.
No, I know.
If you ask one of these colleges do their faculty members have the mandatum, they'll tell you it's none of your business.
Well, explain that to some of my listeners who might not know what the mandatum does mandate.
Yeah, it's essentially the oath of fidelity is the core of it. It's anyone teaching a theological discipline needs to take the oath of fidelity and needs to affirm to the local bishop that they will teach according to Catholic doctrine. It's the heart of what theology is. If they're teaching against Catholic doctrine, they're not actually Catholic theologians.
Sure.
And so it really shouldn't be a problem, and yet it caused such a firestorm in 1990 when Pope John Paul II insisted upon this.
I remember.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, that was the first papal document I was ever asked to read and write a summary of in my new job at the Vatican Information Service, which was part of the press office.
You walked right into the storm.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, I had a whole weekend to read it. I read it like my next breath depended on my writing the summary of it, incorporating all of the good points. So actually, Patrick, this is in a way the mandatum on the shoulders of the bishop as much as it is of the university.
It is. And sadly, the decision that has been made because of all the controversy about it, and it's basically an agreement between the bishops and these universities, is that yes, it's a requirement of canon law that a theologian obtain the mandatum. However, most of the universities will not require it as a condition for employment, and most of the bishops will refuse to disclose who has the mandatum and who doesn't. So in effect, it's completely useless to a student wanting to study theology and wanting to know that they're in a program that is actually orthodox. And so one of our requirements for the Newman Guide recognition is that an institution publicly declares which of its employees have the mandatum. And in fact, every theologian must have the mandatum, otherwise we don't recognize them.
Yeah.
For more information on these stories, or to check out Joan's blog and to ask her a question, go to EWTN.com. That's EWTN.com. Thanks for listening to Vatican Insider on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.